Thank you very much for investing your time with Business Emma this morning, and most certainly Metropole Television. It is lovely to always have you around. This morning, the conversation on our review is on the tiff between Kenya and Tanzania. We do know that since we last spoke on this, there have been developments. Joining us therefore this morning to speak about this is Calvince Adhere. Calvince, good morning, man.
Good morning, Charles, and great to be back.
Man. Get into the conversation this morning. Now, the Cabinet Secretary in the Ministry of East Africa Community and Regional Integration, Aden Mohamed, has stamped a directive issued by a Tanzanian government official banning the entry of Kenyan drivers and cargo into Tanzania as rubbish. Speaking during an online meeting with the Senate Committee on National Cohesion, CS Aden said Kenya will continue to allow cargo from Tanzania to get into the country in line with EAC guidelines. All right, that is where the field has gotten up this morning. Okay, therefore, so Calvince, let's get right into it. For somebody who wants to understand the relationship strangles between Kenya and Tanzania, how far back do you have to travel?
Kenya and Tanzania, these are neighbors. They have had a very interesting relationship. It's been hot and cold from different airports. Trace it back to the 1960s when the two countries were gaining independence. You know, when the two countries got self-rule, they sort of took different paths in terms of socio-economic and political organizing. So we're talking about Tanzania taking a more a socialist kind of approach, where through the Ujamaa system that most people would be aware of. Then we see Kenya taking a more capitalist or African socialism, which more of defined capitalistically. And that was perhaps one of the biggest divergent paths for these two neighbors way back. And the effect of taking these two different paths was that Kenyans were seen to be more aggressive. They promoted more innovation. They promoted more investment. And whatever you did with your energy and creativity led to substantial capital benefits to you as a person. However, in Tanzania, the collective Ujamaa philosophy laid a lot of emphasis on communal good. So there was the element that society took precedence of an individual. And this kind of ideological differences also played out between the leaders, because certainly it is leaders who front this kind of national predisposition to socioeconomic and political organizing. So there were also personal ideological differences between the founding fathers of these two countries. We're talking about Nyerere in Tanzania and Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya. And the relationship has not been very, very friendly at some point, although they have had to do with each other because these are neighbors. You know, we say that you can choose friends, but you can't choose your neighbors, you know. So we look at it that way, and there are specific instances in the relationship that points to a kind of tug of war between the two countries. There's also the element of sibling rivalry in terms of economic push and pull to tackle out in the region as well as continentally. Kenya certainly has an upper hand in a bigger economy from Tanzania. Kenya and Tanzania are both countries which have coastline, if you like, and therefore they can be used by the states for the purposes of exports and imports. Kenya has been doing pretty well compared to Tanzania, which has not gone well with Tanzania. Both countries share natural resources that can promote other productive ventures like tourism. And so you see this kind of tug of playing out once in a while. And it was not just Kenyatta and Nyerere, the founding president, but we've also seen it playing out between Kibaki and Kikwete. And lately we are seeing Magufuli and Kenyatta, President Uhuru Kenyatta, also playing out during these regimes. So we for example, trace in 2015 when there was this pull back and forth about Kenyan workers in Tanzania facing it hard there. The laws are very strict. We've also seen Tanzania and Kenya slapping each other with bans of either travel when Kenya banned the entry of Tanzanian cabs tourists from JKIA. Tanzania proceeded to ban entry of Kenya Airways or limiting the number of trips that Kenya Airways should make to Dar. And so these things have been playing out. We remember in 2019 there were cases of Tanzania auctioning Kenyan cattle or banning chicks that were meant for the Kenyan market. It's just been back and forth, yet they can't afford not to do with each other. These are neighbors.
Is the history that we're talking about this morning, and you can actually see how it goes very back. Now, question there for being there right now, the latest one now. Are we going to look at it as just an issue that was caused by the county commissioner or by that border commissioner, or it's an issue just between Kenya and Tanzania? Going by what CS Adam Mohammed just said the other day, that he terms whatever that guy said as rubbish. So is it just an issue with him or just an issue between Kenya and Tanzania?
We have to look at it in a little bit broader perspective. So what was the genesis of all this? The latest tiff was occasioned by the differences, I think, in national approach to the management of the global pandemic. Kenya, as well as some other regional countries, have taken more or less harmonized approaches, including social distancing, including quarantine, including mass testing, or if you like. But the same has not been going on in Tanzania. So we have seen divergent of views in terms of management of this global pandemic that has, as you may see or say, that it's a nationalistic posture. Every country is trying to grapple with the best way to handle the pandemic. However, as history and the evidence has also shown, pandemics are not national issues. They are cross-national issues and therefore very important for countries to work together. So it was at that juncture of harmonizing, if you like, national strategies to manage this pandemic against regional aspirations to encourage flow of, for example, goods and cargo across borders that brought a lot of difficulties in this. But you probably might want to understand why Tanzania may want to do what it is doing that is probably slightly different from what the other regional groupings are doing. To their credit, there is no harmonized single standard way to approaching the management of the global pandemic. I'm not a medic myself, but from data we've seen, every country has had to do with their own methods and mechanics other than taking some advice from the World Health Organization. And so what happened here was a situation of how do we keep population safe while promoting international relations? And this became a little bit hard for the two countries to crack.
Question that I gave to you yesterday there was, well, the presidents have not spoken about it. But then we have had developments around this. Magufuli saying, look, I've had a phone conversation with President Uhuru Kenyatta. Does that therefore show you that this is a bigger issue than even CS Adam Mohammed tends to think it is?
I think, first of all, it is a great thing that the two heads of state managed to speak on this matter and therefore substantially defraying the emotions and tensions that were there, especially in the borders. And I also think that it's important for the government officials to approach these kind of issues very carefully instead of just lambasting or saying what that could potentially muddy the waters, which are already not very clear. So the two presidents have made it very clear that they have an intention to keep the borders working, as far as we know now, and that despite the conditions that are going to be imposed by each country in terms of managing the pandemic, they still have a window for a normal or if you like, preferential international relations to take place. So we have agreement, I think, on both sides that at least cargo should flow both ways, but in terms of passengers, then every country must put in place measures that they believe can substantially cushion their population from the spread of these infections. So I do want to believe that government officials on both sides really have to be keen when they are making pronouncements. The pronouncement by our own Aden Mohammed may sharply contrast with the pronouncement that were made in Tanga. And these two pronouncements certainly are not working to the benefit of the people of the two countries. They are showing a more nationalistic stance, which may not be necessary at a time when we need as much integration as possible.
All right, let's therefore look at the relation of these two countries that make it very interesting for us to talk about it this morning. Now, according to Magufuli, there are 504 Kenyan companies in Tanzania. All right, and he values this at 1.7 billion. That's about 170 billion Kenyan shillings. And he's saying that these companies provide 50,000 Tanzanians with jobs. All right. Now, over this other side, when we come home, Kenya is home to 24 Tanzanian-owned companies and is valuing this at around 19 billion shillings therefore. So, when we look at these figures at the read this morning, does it make it hard for us to talk about, well, let's get into a very hard divorce, because it looks as if you'll be getting both sides affected?
Of divorce really is something that we mentioned. These two countries must learn to work together, hard as it may, differences of national predisposition to international issues as it may, but they are neighbors. They have to work together. They are very salient and deep-rooted economic, social, and political underpinnings of why they have to work together. So that one of them is the economic that you just highlighted. So Kenyan companies are operating in Tanzania to the values that you mentioned. And we do also have Tanzanian companies operating in Kenya. This tells you the level of economic integration that there is. While from the face of it, it may look like the Kenyan companies have made more investment in Tanzania, including benefiting the Tanzania nationals at the tune of 50,000 of them working for Kenyan enterprises. But just remember that the small hit that we had at the borders have occasioned even price hikes for some commodities that Kenya was importing from Tanzania, including vegetables and cereals. So we have to try and see a balance that these are neighbors. They are beneficial to the relationship, can be looked at in a very broad way. It's very beneficial. And we cannot begin to talk about divorce at this stage. After all, the two countries should be talking about integration at the regional bloc. Right? So we don't have room, in my view, to talk about divorce. What we need to do is to find amicable ways these countries together of lessening the gray areas and amplifying what is working. So economically, you can see that is very significant. Socially, we have cross-cultural issues that between Kenya and Tanzania. We have, communities that are cross-border communities, like the Maasai. These are people who are simply tied together by blood, and separated geographically. And this is something that brings you closer to the kind of people-to-people engagement that Tanzania and Kenya has. Beyond the documented business and economic activities, we do also have a lot of economic activities taking place across the border. Remember, Kenya and Tanzania have several border points, and it's a very long border. And therefore, so many economic activities have also been taking place. And therefore, I think the most important thing speaking right now is for the two countries, as guided by the heads of state, to work together, the officials in the regions, to try to find amicable solutions to this problem and look at the more futuristic part of it.
Wow, to this so, even as we speak about this morning, I want to take you back to 2016 when Tanzania actually did pull out of a joint partnership with some of the countries in EAC, therefore, to sign a deal with, which was going to be called EPA. Good. Do you feel that Tanzania is trying to reassert itself or to assert itself as the stronger element between these two nations? Because if you look at exactly that, then you will see it's as if we are trying to say who's stronger, who can survive without each other. Is that how we should be viewing Tanzania now?
I think modern day international relations really has a little to do with who is stronger, who is weaker, especially when we're talking about community countries that have, agreed to work together in a bloc. I think when we
jump in there, but does it sort of say who I want to work with and why I want to work with them?
It is in every national interest to decide who you want to work with in the best way that you think can bring benefits to your country and to your population. However, isolationism, pushing people aside, especially when they are already tied by the cords of the common destiny under the East African community. It's not something that is very, very good to see. So I think what happened in Tanzania by declining to be part of the IPA that was supposed to promote ESC products to the European Union was simply something that was regrettable. Regrettable because by signing together, they would have allowed ESC to become a formidable market even for investments from outside that could look at the entire market. As ESC instead of single. But at the same time, the countries tend to look at the what we call comparative advantages that they have in terms of what they want to bring onto the table. So if Tanzania felt other leaders of the region were moving in a direction, you also remember there was a coalition of the willing, and therefore do not look at Tanzania in what was happening at the time. When there was a feeling in there that a section of the East African community had started to move together instead of bringing everybody on board, Tanzania had to ask why. And part of this was a diplomatic, I think, posture just to indicate that, hey, you can't forget about us. And if you want to do, then we also have a clause that we can pull back. And remember, this coalition of the willing was also reminiscent of the kind of rivalry that was going on between Kenya and Tanzania in terms of the port development. Bagamoyo was coming up. Mombasa had been the entry point for quite a bit of the East African region. And a lot of countries in the region thinking if Kenya would not update its code of conduct in terms of doing business, including eliminating graft, then they would look for alternatives. And Tanzania looked to be that sure alternative. So there were these issues that you cannot look at one in isolation of the other. You have to bring in the context and understand why Tanzania was growing jittery. It was growing jittery because it felt sidelined. Number two, it was growing jittery because it also wanted to assert its economic relevance by putting up such an investment that would push away Kenya. Kenya will not take lying down.
Therefore, Calvince, I want to talk to you about this, therefore, because yes, this is the time that we have to look about our relation, therefore, that we have economically in terms of a trade balance with Tanzania. Now, let's look at these figures that we have now. Now, Kenya exported goods valued at 333.61 billion to Tanzania last year, a value that rose by 3.87 billion or 13.03% since Magufuli assumed office, which was, however, a smaller value compared to 2016. Now, when you look at how both presidents are downplaying this issue between them, would you say that now Kenya could actually look at who best to partner with? Because it's no denying that Tanzania is also looking at that. Like, who can we best work with? Is it possible to realign our economy to other different strategic partners owing to these numbers?
It's important for every country to always be in the lookout at which partners can give it the best value. But until that time, Tanzania remains one of our most important trading partners. Until we develop those alternative markets, until we develop those alternative sources of import, as well as financing, then people in Tanzania are still going to remain one of our strongest partners in this region. So I think it is up to Kenya to keep shopping for additional partners. But the element of geography, the element of history, the element of culture makes it very advantageous for us to look at the best ways to work with Tanzania. I think what is, in my view, stands out is ideological and misconceptions and perceptions about, it comes to the sibling rivalry of people saying things which cannot be grounded in law or facts. It's simply too much. People just need to tone, and this has got to do with the effectiveness of diplomacy. I mean, Kenyan diplomacy has to reform. This culture of having politicians managing our diplomatic corpus, it's not right. We need professionals to go in and handle some of these issues. And the same has to happen for Tanzania. Tanzania cannot write off Kenya. Kenya is the biggest economy in the region, while much as Tanzania wants to place Kenya, it's in their interest, and everybody can do whatever they want. But I think the national and regional peace, the national and regional cohesion, the regional strategies of working together can be articulated, and we do have frameworks for this. We have the East African community. We have our ministers sitting there with Tanzanians, with Ugandans and Rwanda. There is no reason why these people cannot sit down and look at diplomatic ways of a win-win situation. Kenya and Tanzania still can go back to the drawing board and reevaluate the issues. They are interlinked. As you can see, the small tip is already costing a cost of living in Kenya to go up because the vegetables are not coming through, eggs are not coming through, the meat is not coming through. Yet we are also battling a pandemic. This was the time that the two countries needed to lessen political rhetoric, lessen this nationalistic stance, and find more ways of working with each other for the benefit of the people of Kenya.
Pretty much convinced there is no better way to end this conversation this morning, just like that. Thank you very much for being part and parcel of this morning show.
Thank you very much.
Take him back to the time that he came into the studio. Therefore, this morning, online at Metropole TVKE, our social media platforms across all of them. I am a Charles_Kiage. Let's get talking as well. We take a short break, but once we come back, Ukur Iatani says that the new finance bill 2020 is among the best in the world. Is that true? Where are the strengths and the weaknesses? We have picked for you talking points this morning once we come back.